Welcome back to You're All Doomed, where we slice and dice our way through Friday the 13th Part 3, 13 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Brian.
I'm baffling hallucination, Greg.
This episode begins with Chris hanging out of a window and ends with Chris sitting in the back of some sort of car. We're not really sure what's going on, but she doesn't look very happy.
Yeah, I like that this minute kicks off with resolving the cliffhanger from the previous episode by Chris's shitty members-only jacket tearing and releasing her from Jason's grasp, where she plunges to the ground. I like the detail that the chair that she chucked through the window earlier is already there, like laying broken on the ground. That's a nice touch.
Yeah, but instead of running away after she hits the ground, she decides to peek in the window of the house. I don't know, to confirm that Jason isn't coming after her, I guess, but why waste that valuable time, that head start that you have, and just run?
Yeah.
But she peeks through the window and she does see Jason
thundering downstairs.
Yeah, there's some like inconsistencies with how much the knee, the knife to the knee injury is slowing him down, because here he's getting down the stairs no problem. He's not limping at all, but then later we'll see that maybe it does affect him. But she decides just to wait outside the door again instead of running away.
At that point, I guess when she sees him coming charging downstairs, she figures, I'm not going to be able to get too far ahead of this guy. My only chance is to attack again. So she goes for a third assault, an ambush as he comes out onto the porch. She bashes him on the back of the head with a pretty stout piece of lumber, causing him to just pitch through the railing on the front of the porch. It's great.
Yeah, and Chris takes this opportunity to finally run away, and she runs toward her van. And in a shocking turn of events, she actually has the keys to the van, and it starts on the first try. So This is not something that we're used to seeing in a horror movie. But yeah, she gets in the van and starts to drive away, and she's going down the dirt road, and Jason has recovered already, and he's standing in the middle of the road. But he kind of wimps out and dives out of the way at the last second. I was expecting him to win the game of chicken and make Chris turn out of the way, but I realize she's got the advantage because she's in a van. But
yeah, and I think it's pretty clear that she's gone after him with a knife already, and so he knows she's not gonna balk at running him down with the van. So I like his flying leap out of the way. I think he knows that she wouldn't hold back, and doesn't want to take the chance. So that's pretty great. She does manage to reach the rickety bridge, and I was sure we were going to have a payoff for the rickety bridge here, but that's not exactly what happens.
No, not at all. It's starting to give way a little bit under the weight of the van, but she gets most of the way across the bridge, and then all of a sudden the van just stops, and she realizes that she's out of gas, and she does something which I guess I knew existed, but had never really seen it put into use before. But she flips a switch on the dashboard that says reserve, and the car starts right up. So she's got a reserve gas tank on this van of hers, and so I had to look it up to make sure that it was actually a real thing, and it is. It's just cars can be equipped with 2 gas tanks, and obviously the second gas tank is always full, and you just keep that in the event of emergency. But then you just have a switch or a button depending on the technology, and if one tank runs out of gas, you hit the switch and you get tap into the other tank, and you're off and running. So I thought it was kind of cool technology. I don't know what happens when the second tank runs out. I mean, eventually you
have exterior boosters that you can mount on the back of and top of the van, almost like attachments that contain even more fuel. I kind of like this little bit of business, because I had forgotten, frankly, that was why the motorcycle gang was there. It had slipped my mind, so I was expecting the bridge to be the problem. And when she ran out of gas, I'm like, there's a payoff.
No gas in the van. Yeah.
And it takes her a minute, but I like that she has the presence of mind to remember that her van is equipped with a reserve tank. So that was pretty cool. I also like the shot of Jason kind of limping up to the van in hot pursuit. That was pretty creepy. But you're right. He's a little more hampered by his leg injury now than he was coming down the spiral staircase. The gas tank thing, it's a little bit silly because now the rickety bridge causes a problem. So despite the reserve tank, she's still stuck. So that would just seem kind of a little unnecessarily convoluted.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of point to it. It just, delayed things just a few more seconds. But yeah, the bridge starts to collapse, and Jason's able to catch up to the van, and he reaches through the driver's side window and grabs Chris by the throat. And Chris has to manually roll up her window, which is kind of funny in these days because you'd have electric windows. But, she's just like cranking this thing up, and she traps Jason's hands inside the car, which I thought was also kind of creepy because he's still so close to her, but he just can't quite get to her.
Mm-hmm. He's forced to make kind of like a little Tyrannosaurus pose almost. Right. It's pretty funny.
And so she uses this as an opportunity to climb out of the passenger side. And Jason has a really awesome way of freeing himself from the window. He headbutts the window to smash it, and suddenly he's free. Yeah. So bravo to Jason.
Yeah, that was great. I wonder if he would have done that if he hadn't been wearing a hockey mask. But either way, it was fantastic. I love that moment a lot. It's also really fun to see Jason hustle. He, once he's free from the car window, he takes off again, and he's in hot pursuit. And it's just, a lot of slasher movies these days kind of lean toward the killer being a slow, methodic pace. But I love seeing him really charge along in this one. He comes off as very, very maniacal, and I think that's scary.
Chris runs off and heads to the barn, and Jason's not far behind, and she barricades the door with a shovel, which is, again, it's kind of like the reserve gas tank. It doesn't really slow things down at all because Jason is able to open up the door just enough to reach through and just remove the shovel from the outside. So it didn't really do much. But what I liked is when Jason gets inside the barn, he barricades the door, but he does it much more effectively with the actual, plank of wood or something that's meant to be there to barricade the door.
Yeah.
And so he's like, okay, we're in the barn and you're not getting out, and we're on my terms now.
Yep. Yeah. He's wedged it in nice and tight, so it's not going to be a quick exit for anybody trying to get away. And then, he proceeds to tear the shit out of that barn looking for her.
He's leaving nothing unturned. He's just kicking over every piece of hay and just like every tool, and he's just like, where the fuck are you? And he's pissed.
Yeah, and it's easy to think of Jason as a child-minded moron, but clearly he's just a rage-fueled engine of destruction, and he's on a rampage. Chris has wisely managed to climb up into the rafters of the barn and is kind of hanging or laying out on a beam above his head. I'm kind of unclear as to what her plan is here.
Yeah, because she's not on like the main platform where we've seen, Loco and Fox and even Rick earlier, where they were, bringing in the hay bales. She's on one of the actual rafters, which is a very narrow piece of wood, and she's, straddling it and barely hanging on at all. So, what did she think she was going to get? I mean, you could argue that Jason wouldn't be able to get to her there as easily, but it's not a great plan.
No, she's having trouble hanging on. All he has to do is look up, and he'll see her, and then, he could just throw shit at her until it knocks her off. So that's a weird place to be hidden. And then as Jason passes underneath her and as he continues his search, I can't tell if she loses her grip or purposely does this, but we get a pretty hilarious 3D effect of her crotch flying toward the camera, and her fourth assault is basically attacking Jason with her vagina from above. It's an odd choice. She does manage to knock him down, but I don't know that was entirely intentional.
I think she fell. She was on there, and it was probably, like we were saying, she probably climbed up there thinking, oh, this is a great idea, and then immediately kind of regretted her decision, and you can see her struggling, and she's just having a really hard time, straddling this plank, and then she does fall, and maybe it was, she decided that she wasn't going to, last much longer up there, and maybe she aided her fall a little bit because
put it
Jason
to good
was
use, and
right
she was coming down
them.
anyway.
Yeah, or right underneath her, but she just falls right on top of him, and but what I think is great is she runs away back to the door to try to get out of the barn, and she can't remove the barricade that Jason had placed there, and so Jason had done a good job. And so while she's trying to get out, Jason gets up and grabs a machete and takes a swipe at Chris, but misses and swings so hard that his machete gets stuck in the door. And then Chris heads back upstairs in the barn again.
Yeah, it gives her enough of a chance to run it. I mean, really, she's got nowhere else to go, so she does head up to the loft. She's got a shovel. And manages to conceal herself behind some stacked bales of hay, just to the side of the opening at the top of the ladder. Jason knows that she's gone up there, so he climbs up, and he takes a few steps once he reaches the loft, and she unloads on him with the shovel. It looks like a weak swing at first, but it takes him down.
Yeah, I imagine his ears are ringing and his eyes are crossed, and he's probably just like, because it just bonks him on the head.
Yeah, and he's laid out on the floor, and then she wisely takes the hoist rope for the bales of hay and nooses it around his neck, and gets him all noosed up, and then kicks him out the window of the hayloft. So we get a nice 3D effect of the pulley system as Jason rockets toward the ground, but then he's jolted to a screeching halt by the pulley catching in its mechanism, and we get a beautiful neck snap sound as Jason is hanged.
Yeah, so Chris thinks that this is the end, and so she goes back downstairs and struggles to remove the door barricade, eventually does, and as soon as she opens the door, directly in front of her is Jason hanging from a rope, and it's just this lifeless body, and it's a really cool, just like to get that close to the assailant but know that they can't get to you right now. It was just like a nice shared moment between the two of them.
Mm-hmm. And very scary, like to open the door and see his body dangling there.
Yeah, but he's not lifeless for long. He suddenly just reaches up and grabs the rope and pulls enough slack off of his neck that he's able to actually pull himself off the rope.
Yeah, I like that as he's beginning to free himself from the noose, you can see his eyes under his mask, which ordinarily I don't like. I prefer when Jason's wearing his hockey mask that his eyes are black voids. But in this instance, you can clearly see his eyes, and he's balefully glaring at her. His gaze is fixed on her the entire time. He's lifting the noose over his head, just watching her like, "I'm coming for you, honey."
Yeah, this may take me a few seconds, but you know what's going to happen when I get this rope off my neck.
Yeah.
And then there's something that I think is really kind of cruel here, is that Jason knows who he's dealing with. He knows this girl, and he removes the mask so that Chris can see his face. And Chris instantly realizes that this is the man that attacked her in the woods that night. We've known this all along, but Chris just knew it was just this deformed figure that attacked her 2 years ago. She has no idea that the guy in the hockey mask was the same person until now. And I just think that's a real dick move on Jason's part, because it's like, if being chased by someone in a hockey mask and a machete isn't bad enough, it's like, oh, by the way, hey, remember me?
Right.
It's I just love it's a nice little a little twisting the knife a little bit more, like, I'm going to make this situation just a little bit more traumatic for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because like it happens because he's lifting the rope over his head and it dislodges the mask, but the look of utter glee on his face makes me agree with you that he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's thrilled that he can show her that it's him after all this time. So we get our first really, really good look at Jason's face under the mask here. Like I said, he's sneering at her, but I'm not a huge fan of this rendition of maskless Jason.
There's a little pig-faced.
A little bit. He looks almost like an Uruk-hai from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It's decent makeup work. That's no slight against the crew, but it's just something about the design that doesn't sit quite right with me. I don't love it, but he's hideously deformed. He's scary looking. Just not quite what I was.
Yeah, he doesn't. I think there's enough of a resemblance of what Jason looked like in part 2, which, let's just remind you, was 2 days ago in the timeline. But he definitely looks different from what we saw in part 2. He doesn't have any hair. He's got a little bit of like a pug nose, and he's still got the droopy eye and everything. But yeah, it's not the greatest makeup effect. He just looks more like a wrinkled raisin than like a deformed,
Yeah, and almost more monsterish than deformed human.
Yeah.
So it kind of steers it in a direction that I'm not quite convinced by.
So after, Jason reminds Chris who she's dealing with, he grabs the machete off the ground and they head back into the barn. And out of nowhere, our friend Ollie from the biker gang comes charging out of one of the stables and screams, "Motherfucking psycho!" And he grabs Jason from behind, and Jason turns around and immediately chops Ollie's hand off and then completely just hacks the shit out of Ollie with his machete. So Ollie shows up, which we thought he was dead. He should have been dead, and shows up, screams this thing, and there's not even a fight. It's like he just disposes of him immediately.
Even more quickly than he did in the first place.
Yeah, and I just don't really understand the point of bringing him back. It would have been different if Ollie was able to distract Jason enough that, Chris could, get in another shot or something, but I think it was just done to just surprise people. Like, oh, look, he's back. And then 5 seconds later, he's dead again.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been fun if he'd survived and, like, oh, well, he wasn't such a bad guy after all. Or, they kind of waste this opportunity, I think. I think the intention is that, it just distracts Jason long enough for Chris to unleash her final assault, but it does go by so quickly. I almost forget that his arm is hacked off before he's grounded and then just chopped to pieces with a machete. So yeah, I agree with you.
Are we supposed to believe that he was hiding in the barn the entire time? I mean, after the 38 people who went into the barn every time they heard a noise, and Ollie just hid there all those times, and then at this particular moment decides to come out, or was he
may have been unconscious
knocked
the whole
out?
time,
And then he just happened to wake up during this battle.
Yeah.
Okay.
There wasn't enough of a commotion between when he was knocked out and now to have awakened him from being unconscious, perhaps. And with Chris and Jason thrashing around and thumping around upstairs and stuff, maybe that kind of shook him out of whatever stupor he was in. So yeah, Chris has a moment to make a last ditch effort to put an end to Jason, which she does by burying an axe in his skull.
Yeah, like kind of like in the eyebrow, like like in the right in the forehead eyebrow area.
Yeah, just a thunk of an axe going in his head.
Definitely a deal breaker.
Yeah, not immediately though, because we get one more 3D effect of Jason with the axe buried in his head, reach up and grasping at the camera, which cuts to a reverse of Chris, screaming that you can't be alive. So even she is flabbergasted by Jason's staying power. But then he does go down, and pretty definitively, at least for now. Jason in this movie was played by Richard Brooker, who was 6'3", so he was noticeably taller than Steve Dash from Part 2, which kind of underlines the fact that Jason was a little bit more of a Hulk in this movie. One of his other credits is in Deathstalker, which is a hilarious and fun movie, but is surpassed by the fantastic sequel Deathstalker 2, which is one of my favorite cheesy flicks. Richard Brooker sadly died in 2013 at the age of 58, but he did a great job as Jason.
Yeah, so he's the first actor to wear the hockey mask as Jason, the third actor overall to play Jason. He would also later go on to direct 42 episodes of the Bill Nye the Science Guy TV show.
Having taken care of Jason once and for all, Chris does your favorite thing. She hops in a canoe and paddles out to the middle of the lake, which
why not?
Is really more of a big pond.
Yeah, this is not a very impressive lake. It really just looks like, I would imagine during a dry, drought of a summer or something that there's probably not even enough water in there to go swimming. But right now it's just kind of like a lame little pond.
Yeah, this is definitely not Crystal Lake by any stretch of the imagination. We get a 3D effect of the prow of the canoe pointing directly at the camera. And another animal jump scare as a duck frightens Chris.
Easily the scariest moment of this movie so far.
I'm sorry the duck was not in 3D.
She wakes up the next morning in the canoe. She's pretty close to the shore, but as she wakes up, she looks up at the house up at the top of the hill, and she sees a bloody Jason without his hockey mask on. He's got blood dripping down his face, and he's looking out the window at her. And I remember this scene in particular really scaring the shit out of me as a kid. And I just think, I don't know what it is about it, but I think it was just kind of how primal it was. It was just like, here's this bloody monster and he's looking out the window and
leering through the upstairs window.
Yeah, he sees his prey, and like you just kind of know that even though they're separated, by quite a bit of distance, that his plan is to come down and get her. And I don't know, it was just, that was always very creepy to me. And it's kind of a cool moment now, and understandably she freaks out by this because she's like, wait a minute, I just embedded an axe in this guy's head, and now he's hanging out in the house. He was probably looking for her in the house and didn't think she'd be out in the lake. And she starts to paddle away to get as far away from the house as possible.
About 6 feet.
Right, yeah. And Jason knocks down the front door, which was just awesome. He's like, I'm not even going to open it. I'm just going to plow through it and knock it off its hinges. And he's looking pretty rough, like he's in bad shape. But he starts to run toward the shore, and to get close to Chris, and Chris is freaking out, and she looks back toward the house, but all of a sudden the door is not knocked off the hinges. It's there's nobody looking out the window. There's no one chasing after her. It's like everything seems okay.
Yeah, I mean, she glanced away and glanced back, and suddenly Jason's nowhere, and there's no evidence that he was there at all. Which leads me to ask: was the duck part of this hallucination? Because that's what woke her up. And so then she looked at the house, but yeah, it's just like how deep is this?
Right, where does reality end and the dream begin? Yeah, that's a good question. So Chris is obviously relieved. She realizes now that she imagined this whole thing, so she's kind of like,
oh my God, Mrs. Voorhees jumps out of the lake.
Yeah, and we've got this really disgusting decomposed corpse, head attached, of Mrs. Voorhees jumping out of the lake, and grabs Chris and pulls her under the water. Very, reminiscent of what we saw at the end of part 1 with Alice and young Jason.
Yeah, there's like a worm hanging out of one cheek that's still wriggling, and she's decomposed and pretty gross looking.
Yeah, she looks way worse than Jason does in this movie. It's a pretty good makeup effect.
Yeah, unfortunately, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, because there's no indication that Chris knows about the legend of Jason, about Mrs. Voorhees' history. We had the shot of Mrs. Voorhees' head in the recap of part 2 at the very beginning of this movie, but it played no further role in the movie up to now.
Yeah, there was no, campfire tale where everyone was told about the legend of Jason Voorhees or anything. Like, there's been no talk of Jason in this movie. So if it is her imagination, it makes no sense. And if it's reality and she's really being pulled under the lake by the corpse of Mrs. Voorhees, that doesn't make any sense either, because she was never in the lake. We know her head was chopped off. So none of the two versions really align, other than it's just an excuse to have a jump scare.
One more scare. Yeah. So fine, whatever. That causes another scene transition where Chris is now being attended to by police officers who have somehow been alerted to what's happened here at Higgins Haven, and they're leading her out of the house and into the back of a squad car to take her for medical attention, I presume.
Yeah, we hear the three cops kind of talking to themselves or amongst themselves, and they say that, Chris was the only one left alive, and that she had been mumbling something about a lady in the lake, and they had no idea what she was talking about. And they just say, like, she's gone through shit. There's, she's just lost her mind. There's nothing to see here. And then they drag her into the car.
I'm kind of unsatisfied by this conclusion. I mean, for one thing, no offense to the actress, but I feel like her crazy acting is a little bit goofy.
It's a little over the top.
It's a little too giggly and I'm not super convinced by it.
Like, I've lost my mind. Woo!
It's a little cartoonish. And then the other part that I'm dissatisfied by is that it leaves Chris in exactly the same place that she is at the start of this movie, which is traumatized by an encounter with Jason. So she's gone through no sort of growth or redemptive arc or any sort of catharsis. In fact, she's worse off because she's now a giggling lunatic, whereas before she was at least coming back to Higgins Haven to confront her past. So it's kind of bleak.
And we don't really know what she believes. Does she believe that she killed Jason and then had this crazy dream that Jason was still alive? Or does she believe that she didn't kill Jason and Jason is still alive and she did see him? And then there's too many kind of scenarios where we're just not sure where she left off. The fact that she's kind of like laughing hysterically and needs to be, literally carried into the police car. She's obviously messed up from this whole situation, but what is it? Is it like, I'm hysterical because I finally killed the person that attacked me 2 years ago? Or is she freaking out because she was evidently dragged under the water by a corpse? Like, it's just, you're right. There's no resolution to her character arc. It's just, we don't know where she is.
Right. And what snapped her? I mean, was it, did she go crazy when she wound up killing Jason and then went crazy between killing Jason and getting in the canoe and then had all these crazy hallucinations? Or was the hallucination of being attacked by Mrs. Voorhees what totally snapped her from reality? It's kind of garbled. And like I said, it's just too bad that she actually winds up worse off than she was in the beginning. Instead of being a victorious survivor, she's kind of the ultimate victim of all of this. From a death perspective, it's just two. Ali confirmed, and Jason Voorhees.
Potentially. We're not entirely sure, but yeah. I mean, even the viewer isn't really sure what to believe because we're just not sure what's going on and, what was dream and what was reality. But I guess the likely possibility is that Jason is probably dead and then she had this hysterical moment at the end, but we're not sure. So that brings this episode to a close. Thanks for joining us. I've been Brian.
I've been Greg.
And you are all doomed.